Hey investor friends, I'm Michelle Markey and I'm back again with another edition of what were some of my favorite super investors invested in terms of stocks back in the latest quarter that we know about, in the fourth quarter of 2023, because on Valentine's Day 2024 or thereabouts, a lot of my favorite super investors 13F filings just came out. So if you also enjoy keeping tabs on what some of the best investors are invested in, I hope you'll like and subscribe, because I'll share some of my thoughts on what I've seen published online and what you can also feel free to check out. It's publicly available, but the only catch is that we only get to know what the best investors, or at least managers who have assets under management of over $100 million, were invested in up to 45 days after the end of a quarter. So they could choose to publish their 13F sooner, but a lot of them don't. So in thinking about that, a lot of these fund managers want to just keep some of their secrets to themselves as far as their investing moves. So it's no surprise that a lot of these super investors 13Fs don't come out until the very end of that time window when they're required by the SEC to make this published. So if we think about that, one of my favorite super investors is Warren Buffett, and he's the fund manager effectively of Berkshire Hathaway, this conglomerate that's really kicking butt, and it's been on a tear since the beginning of the year. Like, judging by Berkshire B share, that's up about 12% since mid-January, when it was kind of hanging around the $360 per share range, and last I checked it was at $407 per share. So it looks like Berkshire has been kind of rocketing up there, and I wonder if Buffett is buying back shares, and maybe we'll find out in the upcoming shareholder letter that hopefully will come out at the end of February 2024. And looking at what Berkshire Hathaway has been up to, just because Warren Buffett is the CEO and the main investing guy there, it doesn't mean he's always making all of the investing decisions. So just keep that in mind, because you might think, oh, Buffett sold Markel, and that may or may not have been him. It might have actually been maybe one of Buffett's investing lieutenants, like the Todd and Teds, who maybe sold some of the few stocks that Berkshire sold completely out of in the fourth quarter of 2023. And judging by looking at some of Berkshire's activity recently, they've been pretty bearish. So if we take a look at how they had a portfolio value of about $350 billion in the market, it looks as if they had 41 stocks, and surprisingly, they reduced Apple a little bit by about 1%. It's always interesting when Berkshire seems to reduce their Apple holdings by 1%, and then I wonder if Warren Buffett will regret that a little bit in the annual letter and say, oh, it was silly of us to let go of some Apple, but they could be reallocating those funds to other investments. Like, maybe they've reallocated some of the profits they made to buying some more Chevron or Occidental Petroleum, and also maybe Sirius, which they added 315% of. And it's interesting because that seems to be a growing holding that they started adding to from the previous quarter, in the third quarter of 2023. But meanwhile, they sold some of Paramount Global, so they didn't sell out completely, and they still have about almost $1 billion in Paramount Global, as well as they reduced significantly by 77% in HP Computer. So that's a bit interesting. And looking at their overall activity for the fourth quarter, it looked as if Berkshire was more bearish than they were bullish, because they only basically bought 3 American stocks. So who knows if Berkshire has been buying some more Japanese stocks? Hard to say, because the 13F filing only requires that Berkshire publish their American equity holdings. But we can see that, like I mentioned, they reduced on 3 more, and then they sold out completely of 4 stocks, like D.R. Horton, which looks to be a home building company, Markel, which is an insurance company. And I'm actually kind of surprised they sold out of that completely, because I kind of thought Markel was like a Berkshire wannabe, that they were an insurance and financial services company trying to be like a Berkshire. So I would have thought that kind of their objectives are aligned, but who knows what's going on there. But we can see that Berkshire had been reducing their share count in both Markel and HP in the third quarter. So it seems to show this trend that they're reducing their ownership of those companies, if not for good. And the same with Stone Co., which is a commodity type company in limestone and sand and so on. And then there's also Globe Life, which is a financial services company. So we see two financial services related companies here, one home builder and one in commodities. So I'm not sure what to make of some of that. And who knows what some of the trends might be with some of the others, but you can see even continuing from their bearish trend from the third quarter where they reduced even on some other stocks that I might have mentioned in a previous video about how they reduced in the likes of Amazon, or they sold out of completely a bunch of stocks. So it's kind of interesting seeing Berkshire be so bearish, and looks like they're holding on to over $150 billion of cash. So it looks like Buffett and or whoever are making some of the capital allocation decisions might be being a little defensive. Maybe they're investing a little bit more in US Treasury bonds for the time being and milking that sweet 5 to 6% interest that they could be getting. But I'm sure Berkshire is waiting to find opportunities to invest, because I really think that Buffett isn't just trying to make silly investing decisions, especially if the market could be perceived to be a little frothy. And with the late Charlie Munger, one of my favorite investors of all time, while he passed away in the fourth quarter of 2023, it looks like the Daily Journal Corporation stayed as is. They neither sold nor bought any shares. So they've held on to all of their current bank stocks as well as Alibaba. And that's basically the update I have on Daily Journal or DJCO. Their portfolio has remained the same. And moving on to Li Lu, it looks like he didn't really do so much besides add to his East-West Bancorp and sell out entirely out of Micron all the way back in the second quarter of 2023. So it looks like there wasn't any American equities that Li Lu seemed to invest in. And the same thing with Guy Spier, unfortunately, from what I can tell. Guy Spier hasn't had any activity in American equities in his aquamarine capital portfolio since he sold Twitter a while ago. So I know that Twitter is also known as X nowadays, but we haven't seen if Guy Spier has invested in much. Maybe some people know if he's investing in some international stocks, but that's as far as I know, which is not that much as far as what Guy Spier has been investing in lately. And then moving on to Mohnish Pabrai, he's been a little bit more active in American equities with the fact that he's reduced in a couple of stocks and bought more of two other stocks. So even though he's reduced somewhat in Alpha Metallurgical Resources and the same with Consol Energy, he has added to his position in Arch Resources and bought into Warrior Met Coal. So I'm not super familiar with all the things that Mohnish Pabrai is invested in. I know he did super well with this Turkish logistics company Resos, and you may be able to get some insights into some of his foreign holdings. But as far as his American holdings, it's a little interesting seeing Mohnish kind of invest. And just a little bit of a warning to folks, we wouldn't want to just blindly follow the likes of a really great investor like Mohnish Pabrai and just blindly copy what he's investing in if we don't know these companies and don't understand them as well as he might. So you might want to double check your knowledge and your circle of competence around these companies before you were to invest, because just because Mohnish Pabrai is invested in maybe a bunch of materials and energy companies doesn't mean that that makes me want to invest in them. So I try to stay away from companies that I know nothing about, and this would be another case of that. So while it's sort of interesting to see what Mohnish has been investing in, if you're interested in similar companies, go ahead and do the research. But I wouldn't just blindly copy whatever Mohnish is invested in just because he happened to buy into them, because you never know if he turns around and sells them again like he did with some of the Chinese tech stocks. So keep that in mind before you might just copy a super investor. And then finally, I wanted to touch on Michael Burry, who I think is very fascinating to keep tabs on. And this is another investor you don't want to just blindly copy their trades, because you don't know what the strategy might be behind what is going through the mind of a Michael Burry and why he's in certain stocks. But looking at Scion Asset Management, Alibaba seems to be interesting in that he's added to that position, and the same thing with JD.com, and they're both e-commerce companies. But bear in mind, it's a relatively small amount considering it's about almost 6 million in each of those Chinese e-commerce companies. So while those are the top of his portfolio, you never know what strategy Michael Burry is employing here. So definitely be careful before you were to just follow in his footsteps. But another compelling note that I wanted to add is sometimes he almost has no stocks he's invested in. So it's kind of encouraging seeing him buy into a lot of stocks, including some that I'm paying attention to, like Google, Alphabet, and Amazon. Those are some big tech that apparently Michael Burry seemed to convey some confidence in the fourth quarter of 2023. So I find that kind of interesting because some of those stocks are on my radar as well. And some of the other stocks that he's invested in, while I've heard of some of them, they're pretty unfamiliar to me in the overall. Like I've heard of MGM and Advance Auto Parts, Warner Brothers Discovery, and Curate, but I'm not as familiar with, say, Safe Bulkers or Mettler Toledo International. So you have to do some research if some of these companies might be of interest to you, and just take what some of these super investors are invested in with a grain of salt. Sure, it could be encouraging to see an investor we might admire venture into some of these stocks, but that doesn't always mean that it's right for our portfolio. So I like keeping tabs on it just to help my overall investing knowledge. But just because some of these investors are invested in certain companies doesn't necessarily influence whether I will invest in these same companies or not. So please take that with just this educational mindset of wanting to learn about figuring out why a super investor might even be invested in certain companies in the first place, or trying to figure out the bear case, like why did some of these investors sell out of certain companies, could be something to think about. Because while you see some semiconductor companies like Nvidia and Taiwan Semiconductor ratcheting up, you also see others that might not be doing quite as well, like Micron. So maybe it's no surprise that the likes of Monish Pabrai or Li Lu might have sold out of some of those holdings at one point. So it's kind of interesting to kind of try to figure out why are some of these companies doing well in some respects with the general market, and why are some of these super investors maybe not in some of those same companies. It kind of makes you wonder. So with that, if you enjoyed this video or learned something, please like and subscribe. And I hope all the best in your journey to investing the best you can. Till next time.